the name.
That Mike Leyland, Scotty?
I think so. I've lost the chat for a second there, but I think it was for a second.
We've lost Josh.
Yeah, we've lost Scott too. Oh, maybe he's just the main screen.
Oh no, we lost Josh. Then we got him back again now.
Josh, yeah.
Oh, no, this Scott. No?
Josh went onto the other screen.
Yeah. So
Oh, you're in the bottom.
Ireland just said g'day to everyone. It's good to see you. That's doubling up, but
We've lost Scott too. Oh, maybe he's just the main screen.
Ignore that.
We don't need to see us, do we?
So there's a couple of things about like these virtual tastings. There's a real benefit of not having to clean up glassware afterwards. But there's also the element of like for this one going to a restaurant and paying a restaurant that sort of they do all of this, and this I don't have to move cables and stuff around.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, to go to a restaurant again.
Yeah,
Man. When do you reckon we'll get to go to a restaurant? I don't know.
We got
January 15th.
Was it? We got 3 weeks ago. We went to one just before we went to lockdown again, and it was amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah, we spent way too much money. Yeah.
The last restaurant we went to was your place, Lee and Bree. That was the morning tea. That was it. That was the last time.
I think you bought the food.
Yeah, you had to bring the food.
Yeah, it was BYO, everything. No, except for the coffee. We had the coffee.
Yeah.
But yeah, I turned 40 in lockdown. It's pretty boring.
I missed that. What was that one?
And I guess you guys have got a long way to walk for your around the block. Can you do it? Can you do it in an hour?
We're allowed to be out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, stage 3, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And where are you located actually? Like
St. Peter's, I think still.
Yeah.
Sorry, me? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. I missed it. Yeah, Sydney. So we're just not far from the airport.
Mhm.
Actually, it's been quiet here recently because normally we can't hear anything because of the planes. Now we hear a plane. It's like, oh, shit, there's a plane.
you run out and have a look.
Very different. Yeah.
At the end of the war.
And your release is coming up soon, is it, Edward?
Yeah. We first 6 have gone. We did 2 through COVID, which sold out, which is good. And then the next one is the one we've got out tonight, but it's not ready. It's still in the barrel. I had promised Scotty that I'd do it, and then I sort of forgot, and then I went, oh no.
And on that note, we might kick things off on that bombshell. It looks like we're live to everywhere we need to be live at whiskyfair.com.au/forum at the Facebook, the Oak Barrel Facebook, and here in the Zoom chat. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Oak Barrel's Whisky Department's Night of Nights every year. Looks a little bit different in 2020, but the Australian Distillers Dinner is a go, and it's my great pleasure and excitement to welcome everyone here tonight into and to be able to host this at all. My name is Scott Fitzsimons. I look after all the whisky here at the Oak Barrel and Sydney Whisky Forum, and it is my great pleasure again to have so many great distillers and people involved with whisky from around the country here for the Distillers Dinner. A couple of things before we get starting tonight. Normally we would be sitting in a restaurant, eating lots, drinking lots, and talking a lot of rubbish. We do have some people tonight who were lucky enough to snag up the tasting packs that we're going to go through tonight. If you didn't get in time to have one of them, that's all right. Please drink along with anything you've got at home. Feel free to ask questions and that sort of thing as well. But yes, please ask questions of our lovely distillers here tonight. And the other thing is to just bear with us. Some of the challenges that come with virtual tastings are the internet supplies and those sort of connections. And we do know that Victoria is being pummeled by a storm at the moment. So particularly 3 of our distillers could go either way when it comes to power and internet, and particularly Josh Walker, who unfortunately has had to scramble to home from the distillery because the distillery doesn't have any power at the moment. So cheers to Josh, and first and foremost, I might just say g'day to everyone here on the stream and welcome, and g'day to Ed in not far from me, funnily enough, in St Peters. They're from ACD.
There you go,
Lee,
mate.
yeah, Lee and Bree from Backwoods in Yakandanda. I've got Naomi and Stuart McIntosh from Chiefsun Distillery.
Guys.
Josh Walker from Tim Boone at home, where there is light and power and electricity and all those wonderful things.
G'day everyone.
And Fred Siggins from Sullivan's Cove, who thought it was a good idea to get out of Tasmania and go to Victoria, and doesn't he wish it was the other way around now?
Absolutely. Nice to see you, Scotty.
Yeah. So we're going to go through one of the things about Distillers Dinner every year is that we get to try some either brand new releases or rare releases or something that are quite interesting. And who we've chosen for the series tonight are not only fit that bill, but also the stories behind those whiskies inform the distillery and also inform a bit of a journey from, in terms of the Australian whiskey scene. So we've got tonight distilleries that are launching their first whiskey or have just launched their first whiskey. Some distilleries a little bit down the journey, some distilleries that are adding new things on. And then in the case of Sullivan's Cove, a distillery that's almost in the second or third phase of their distilling life come to fruition. So that's going to be quite an interesting and fascinating thing to sort of talk about. I do have a bit of an order that I want to run through tonight, and that's sort of guided as much by the strength of the whiskies and that sort of thing, but also in a bit of the story that goes through. So without further ado, and if you have one of these drams at home, feel free. And if you do have the whiskies, and they are in these round bottles rather than the square bottles, they can be a little bit aggressive to get off. So don't be afraid to use pliers to attack the bottles. But I might throw down, while I think the storm is just about to hit them or it's just passed, Naomi and Stuart McIntosh from the Chiefsun Distillery, who've been guests in the Oak Barrel here not long ago, or actually it feels like a lifetime ago, but not long ago in the tasting room just opposite me, who would have been making, if they would have agreed to come to Whisky Fair, would have been making their debut at the Distillers Dinner and Whisky Fair this year. But Naomi and Stuart, how are you guys?
We're great, thank you. Great to be here tonight. So
We'd prefer to be up in Sydney, to be honest, but it's not a bad compromise.
yeah, we look forward to next year where we could be there in person for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Look, when we launched here, we spoke about the various 900 series, the standard and the cask strength and the pure malt and that sort of thing. There is a brand new whiskey onto the market from you guys called the Tannist, which I'm going to pour a little bit for myself of. But do you want to give us a bit of a look in, a check-in from basically what it's been 2 years now or 1.5 years since you've had whiskey on the market, I think, and what's informed the Tannist and that sort of thing, and just give us an update on where you guys are?
Yeah.
It's so at the end, so we've been at market for 18 months now, so a year and a half. And I guess at the end of the first year of sales, we really started to analyse sort of what the consumer was asking for, the feedback we got on the whiskies, on the price point, on volumes. So the Tannist, even though we started the project 2 years ago, we brought it forward a little bit to what we had expected based on what people were sort of in the direction, I guess, we think the market's going. So the Tannist, so Chiefsun is Macintosh backwards. So Macintosh means son of the chief. And under the old Tannistry system, basically it wasn't the same as the British system. It was basically you had to fight to become the Tannist. So you were the heir apparent during the living lifetime of the king or the chief. So hence the Tannist is the up and coming heir apparent. So we bought this whiskey out. It was something that had evolved, and we realised that 1-3% of whiskey drinkers who really love their whiskies, they got our core range, but the other 97% of the whiskey drinking fraternity either couldn't afford it or they were very big expressions. So we really created the Tannist to be this early entry, more approachable and more recognisable whiskey.
Yeah, so it's been aged in, so it's a double wood, so it's been aged in French oak ex-sherry barrels, which is what our core range is aged in. And then the other part has been aged in American oak ex-bourbon barrels. So we fuse them together and it's softened our whiskey, and we think it's a very sweet whiskey, and as we said, very approachable, very easy to drink.
It's like going up a slippery dip. It's got that little recognisable kind of vanilla and honey and citrus at the start, and that's what you get on the palate. But then as it sort of grows into this larger French oak component, so we like that slippery dip up thing, that it makes it just more approachable, easy, understandable. And because of our scale now, because of the American oak, because of the malt, we're able to get it out at a much lower price than the majority of our core range.
Was that's a really interesting point to come out with, you know, a new core range whiskey, you know, 18 months down the track. In terms of what you were saying then with looking at the market and what you were seeing, was that information coming back to you as well? Were people saying, hey, that's great, but I can afford this once every 3 months. It'd be great if there was one I could afford every, you know, more often, or?
I think the pushback has been a lot mainly from the bars and from that part of the industry, to be honest.
Yeah, that's
The
right.
pushback on price has been there.
When we sold a lot of whiskey in our first honeymoon year, without a doubt, I mean, that was fantastic. But I guess we also realised because we're big, we needed to have that scalability in the reach. And so we love independents, and they do a fantastic job with our core range, because it's something people go to a specialist bottle shop to buy a specialist whiskey. But we also realised in terms of future and survival and scale, it was about bringing whiskey out that could penetrate further. That was the feedback we were getting about people's ability to afford the whiskey. And like I said, that analysis of that, let's say 97% of people, they don't want to spend that much. They want to consistently spend a lower amount. So.
Yeah. One of the things that always fascinated me from the start with you guys was that concept of, you know, traditionally, particularly if we base ourselves off, you know, Scottish single malt, there's a lot of talk about casks and the different types of casks. And your first 3 releases were all about the malt. The cask treatment was exactly the same and the malt was different, and you create like 3 completely different whiskies. And I loved that reversal of roles and different way of talking about whiskey. And I think that's something that we'll hear from all the distilleries we talk to tonight, and we've heard it a lot already this week, is that the Australian whiskey market and the consumer is very interested in hearing, you know, whiskey approach from different angles. And so have you had, you know, how has it been to communicate the Chief Son story through the way you make whiskey to people? Are people pretty absorbent, or are they going, okay, I don't really understand that, or how have you found it?
Well, there's lots to our story. So, you know, we've got lots to tell people, and people are intrigued. Like they love it. Like, you know, of course, like everyone knows, you get those people that don't really care too much, but then you get those that really love it and want to know loads about it. And you're right. So we do make 3 different recipes, if you like, and then age in the same barrel. And so that is a really cool aspect that people really love, because it shows, you know, what the barrels do, but what the difference in the new make is doing in that barrel.
And they're, I mean, you've had them all, they're ridiculously different, every single one of them. And it's malt composition. So it does change a few parameters, because everyone, I mean, you know, the old countries talk about 80% of the flavour coming from the barrel. Well, you can clearly tell that ours aren't 80%. You know, there's a big contribution, because our new make is, as all new make is quite harsh and earthy, but we polish it up in the same barrels, and it's, you know, so that is a great experience. So people don't go, wow, that's all different timber. They go, yep, that's completely different whiskey. And it's good too, because we always get asked the region question, mate. What region do you represent? Well, New World, I guess. But it's because every whiskey is a different region. We've got our sweet peat, which is, well, unique. It's really nothing like that out there. There's, you know, more, I guess, Highland and Speyside with our pure malt, and then you've got the richness of our 900 standard, which kind of, I don't know, fits into some. So it's nice to not have a region or be copying anything. It's about creating something completely unique.
And people love like the different malts is what gives the whiskey the different flavours. Understanding that part of the process,
That's a really interesting point. And, you know, maybe 10 years ago, when you did have a far less amount of distilleries and amount of product on the market, you could, potentially, divide up the states into different regions. But throwing it out to our other distillers we've got tonight, does anyone here feel like they work in a region in Australia? Like, is there a, Victorian Alpine region, or is there like an inner west of Sydney region, or like, does anyone else like feel that they work within a region in Australian whiskey?
Yeah, it seems like it's early days, I suppose, but I know in everything that we've tried to do in setting up and the way we're sort of crafting our whiskies, we just want to create something that represents where we live. So, that kind of means we're working in some really kind of tight parameters in that, we'll only use malt that's grown nearby. We'll only use casks that have had Australian products in them. And so I guess, for us, we've only just released our first whiskies, but we're really trying to, I guess, celebrate where we live and get that inside our casks and get it inside the bottles. So don't know yet, but hopefully, we can create something that is kind of unique to where we live, which is, a pretty beautiful place with a lot of other great products. And we sort of feel like we can slot right in there.
It must be interesting, Fred, and sorry, a quick g'day to a few people jumping on the Facebook, to Alex Darlenberg, to David and/or Caroline Taylor, and to Jacob Croman, who delivers me Chief Son on a regular basis, which is always an excellent thing to do. But I mean, Fred, with Sullivan's Cove, any distillery in the past 20 years that's opened up in Tasmania has tried to, in one way or another, be like Sullivan's Cove. And so you're almost in a position of defining the region. Do you find that, like, people trying to create regions and associate themselves like that?
Well, I guess I got a couple of different answers to that. I suppose in terms of, regionality, I do think that people have a tendency to think of Tasmania as being a unique region within Australian whiskey. And to a certain extent, I think that's fair because the climatic conditions are different. So obviously Tasmania is just a little bit cooler than most places on the mainland, which means that you have the potential to age the whiskies a little bit longer. That being said, not everyone takes that opportunity. And so I'm not sure, you say that people try to sort of emulate Sullivan's Cove, but I don't really see that much of that because we age our whiskies for so much longer than most people in Tasmania. I feel like the classic Tasmanian style is small cask, usually heavily fortified wine influenced. And obviously not every distillery is doing that. And there are more distilleries now, relying on bourbon casks and other styles of it. But I think that generally when people think of Tasmanian whiskey, they think of that kind of intensely cask dominant style, whereas we actually generally focus more on the malt. And it's great to hear you guys over at Chief Son talking about, using different variations of malt to actually create the differences in flavor, because I think that's something that we should really be playing around more with in Australian whiskey. So it's nice to see.
Yeah.
It's
the other thing too is from the state perspective. I mean, we're best of breed is one of our statements we follow. So that means we're not about being Victorian. Like if we want to use it, in our case, if we want to use New South Wales malt or any parameter. So I mean, we support very much an Australian industry, and within regions, there's definitely some uniqueness about the Tassie style in a way, and I understand what you're saying, Fred. And I guess hotter climate create a slightly different whiskey, but I don't know, we're all about creating an Australian whiskey industry, and I don't divide it out into regions per se.
Yeah. The one thing I love about Tannis, and I've only been trying it for like the past week or so, is that it's inherently Chief Son. There is Chief Son DNA. That's quite might be a funny thing to say only, 18 months into the journey, but there is a DNA in that whiskey and where it's coming from, whether it's the malt or the barrel management or whatever, but this tastes like the other whiskies. There's that thread. So I think that's a great achievement, because I think it can be very easy to acknowledge what you guys have acknowledged and say, okay, we need a stepping stone into our premium range, and to come up with something that's a little bit left of center, that's younger for the sake of being younger, or using different casks for the sake of using different casks. But this is very much in the family tree. So well done, and excellent. I'm having it as my first drink tonight, but would go like on a winter's breakfast. I think. So porridge where we've got a bit of brown sugar on it.
A deep breakfast.
Not cornflakes, but like a warmed up breakfast. This would go well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just get so much honey and citrus and vanilla, but the honey's what really gets me. And it's that we grew up in the Blue Mountains, and it's at the bottle brush about this time of year. You stick your fingers in it, and that's the honey we've got in there, and that's pretty cool.
All the grevilleas. I didn't stick my fingers in the Banksias. I used to pick off the grevilleas and you suck the honey out of the bottom of them.
So we're happy to have a fair chunk of that in this whiskey.
Yeah, awesome. Now, if you do have the samples with you tonight, if you are drinking along at home, please drink responsibly and carefully. These are 30 ml samples that we've sent out. If we were doing this at a restaurant or at the Oak Barrel here, we'd be doing 15 ml samples. So you get a fair bit of booze, save some for the end or save some for tomorrow. But good day to Crafty, who's, while we're all playing, he's working. So I'm much prefer to be doing what I'm doing. And to Ben Baranow down in Melbourne there in lockdown as well. Thank you guys for that. We'll keep chatting, but I think we might say good day to OCD Distilling, which if I open the door, I can almost see from where I am here in Sydney. We've got electricity and power and everything up here at the moment, and no storms, so we should be good. But Edward, you again probably going to make your debut at Distillers Dinner this year. Again, if you would have accepted the invitation that was coming your way, but you've sort of been working for a little while under the scenes a little bit, and everything you've made so far, you've sold out to the point that this isn't your first release whiskey, but this cast sample was all you could offer for tonight because you have sold everything. So I mean, you're in Sabine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your setup there, which looks pretty impressive from where I'm sitting?
Yeah, well, this is the barrels behind us. So this is thankfully getting bigger every week as we add to it. But look, so we have been doing sort of for a while now. I mean, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, under the house is where we actually started distilling. So actually, the lovely lady at the ATO bonded my garage, which was sensational, and I went about getting a 70-litre pot still with a plate, a column plate on top, and started the journey of really having a look at how could I make Australian whiskey, and did it under the guise of a proof of concept. So which I think helped the ATO navigate the fact of what I was doing, that I wasn't going to go out and do some mass business under there, and really started to think about what could I make. And to be fair, when I started, I think I went down the path of looking at the main commercial malts that you can buy out there. I knew I wanted a malted whiskey, but I didn't have a lot of success early on, and I started with it. I'm not going to name anything because several years, whatever, but didn't have a lot of success with those initial malts, because although the science of it worked, and in terms of the fermentation and all that sort of stuff was great, when it went through the still, the flavour was very lacking. It just didn't taste right, and what I was finding was that things that I didn't like were becoming a lot stronger. And they weren't. And then I had to go on this big journey about learning about how grain actually works in terms of sizing and all these wonderful things. It was an education I didn't necessarily know I had to get, but I did. And on the cusp of it, I then started to go, well, surely I can just buy from a farmer, in Australia, or at least in New South Wales. That actually put me onto, and almost fell over, Stu and Brad at Voyager Malts. And Stu he was great. Like he was very helpful, and I gave him a spec as to what I wanted. I wanted a malted barley, and he said, sure, but I've got to sell you a ton. And I went, that's awesome, because it's under my house and I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But it did. So on a summer's day in sinking heat, I was about to leave for work in a suit, and a truck rocked up and dumped it on the road. And I live in the burbs, and it's 25 metres from my garage to my front and I dragged it in, and so began the journey. And to be honest, mate, the Latrobe from James Kite's farm went through the ferment, and I was probably rushing a little bit, because as you do when you get quite excited when you get something new, and I couldn't get it through the still fast enough. And what came out actually tasted like bloody whiskey to me, and I went, well, this is fantastic. And we started to look at well, why? And obviously we started to understand grain sizing and stuff, but then also why in terms of what people were getting paid for what they were producing. And that started us down the definite path of sort of looking at, well, what is fair price to pay for things and all that. And that's sort of become one of the mainstays of the business in terms of making sure that people are getting paid the right amount for their product. And we tend to find that it means that we end up with a better quality product. And that goes right through, because we do vodkas as well, right through the products for the vodkas and that sort of thing, which was great. So under the house we distilled. The average 50-litre barrel was about 18 mashes and 20 distillations, give or take. Some of those between 12 to 13 hours. So there literally was a lifetime in a barrel when it was coming out. So,
we'll be there.
Yeah.
there's something different about doing these things with other distillers live, and you can just read the reactions, and they're just like,
Oh,
yeah.
8 months to fill a barrel kind of stuff. It's brilliant.
Oh, mate, so my wife said to me at one stage, so does the sweat go in with it? Is that like a bonus? So yeah, that went on, and I remember the first barrel, I sort of had made up enough new mate to go into a barrel, and I said to a mate who's a distiller, I said, I think I'm going to do this to it, and he just said no. He said, you're done, it's ready, put it in the barrel, it's good to go. And that was great. It was great feedback for me, because obviously I put it with effort in, and it was like someone who was in the industry and knowledgeable saying, no, this is the way to go. And then I got to sit on a panel, very much a ring-in, clearly a ring-in, because there was the band. I think there was, Bill Lark was there, Starwood was there, someone else, and then it was me. It was like clearly a thing. And when they tasted the new make, Bill Lark liked it, and I was like, well, that's bloody brilliant, isn't it, really? And he asked me what yeast we used. So I now don't tell anyone what yeast we use. I'll tell you everything. Not tell any of that. So I figured he wants to know. So yeah, it's been quite a journey sort of going through. And then moving out of the house, I've teamed up with my sister Julie, and we've opened up the distillery at St Peter's. And thankfully we have a larger still. So we have a 400-litre Bay Marie style still with an onion on top. A little bit different. If you look at the website, you can see. And there's a whole reason behind that. I won't bore everyone now, but yeah, it's gone really well. So the sample tonight is obviously La Trobe. This is not finished yet, and this is a new French oak barrel that's only been lightly toasted. So there's no charring or anything like that in it. And this is the first one we did here. The other one's in the racking, and I'm not strong enough to lift it up and show you. You just asked me, it looks like this one here. And it's different. I got very geeky, and I got into the whole thing of what did whiskey used to taste like before we used barrels that had previous use and before we charred. Because obviously back in the day, charring wasn't necessarily the thing to do. My imagination, it's someone going in with a flagon into a corner shop full of barrels, and you just get to fill it with the one you want. And that's sort of why I went down the path of doing it. And the first one we did, this one here, was fantastic. So this is the second one of a new French oak that we will launch. This is straight out of the barrel, so this is at 66% ABV. So careful kids. But it's sort of definitely on its way. We're sort of aiming for that baguette buttered style flavour. We want to have a creaminess to it, and if you can imagine what the bread shop smells like at sort of 5 a.m. when it's firing, that's what we're aiming for. So yeah,
almost got a rye note to it, hasn't it?
Yeah,
It's got a bit of rye in there.
That nose has quite a lot going on. It's a little bit like idiosyncratic a little bit, but like for me, the beauty of that is the texture on the palate, just the oiliness, that sort of really velvety sort of texture that I'm getting through. And a couple of people coming through. Matt Wilson on Facebook says, cheers for the sweat. I think he's had a couple of whiskeys so far. And Raf in the Zoom here says, blood, sweat, and cheers. So.
Yeah. It's good stuff. Thanks. So, yeah, I think it's coming quite nicely. Probably another 3 months. She'll be ready to go.
Yeah. What will this whiskey be released at? Like, what are you releasing your core ranges at, or your releases at?
In terms of ABV or in terms of
ABV, yeah.
Yeah, so typically, look, I cut it to where I like to drink it. I mean, it's very much around I make what I like, and then if you like that, that's great. You get to drink what I like. So typically the ABV starts between 50 and high 58, maybe 60%, depending on the barrel. The way I see it is, for the person who buys it, the advantage is if you want a lower ABV, you can always add some water to it. You know, if you drink it with ice, then that's good power to you. If you mix it with something else, well, buy something else. But, you know, it sort of lets people have that flexibility as to what they want to do with it. If I cut it further, look, I could, but for me, this is, you know, when we're in that higher thing. I mean, I like alcohol, right? I mean, we're in distilling, for God's sake. It's that balance between how do I get the maximum flavour of the story of the barrel, still taste the grain in the product to drink, and that's what I'm aiming for. So as I said, you know, if you want to cut it and have it a bit lower, you can. But this is where I sort of see how it's drunk. But yeah.
So what are most of your barrels, are they 50s back there, are they?
No, so I started with 50 because under the house, well, two parts really. There was only really Tassie Cask Company to start with. So the options were the 20s, which I just felt in Sydney where they were going to be too small. The highs and lows of temperature, I just couldn't see it working for me. 100s would have been great, but I had to be able to lift them, and I can't lift 100 litres full. I mean, I reckon Lee like he could. Look at him. He was a bit of a...
Yeah, Lee.
Yeah.
He's
It's the beard that's doing it. The beard makes him stronger.
That's Bree.
You look like it too, mate. So,
yeah. So just Bree, can you confirm that you've been starting to hire a hubby for distillery purposes?
I get Dean from Corowa to come and lift them.
Oh, no.
Oh, nice.
So Dean's showing up in our big questions on Saturday. I've got another couple of big questions for him now.
He'll be watching. He'll love that. I'll never hear the end of it.
Sorry, Edward.
So the answer is the ones directly behind me are 50s, but most of them are 100 that are going. 100s or 114s, depending on where they're from. Obviously, the Frenchies love to do 114, just to be difficult. But to be honest, most of the 100s I find are 106 or 108. I'm yet to have a barrel.
Absolutely.
They're never really right. So typically we find aging 50s in the weather here is about a 30-month time frame. 100s, we're probably looking at about 3.5 years before they're going to be ready. In saying that, I'm not a great believer in opening barrels once I lay them down. They tend to not get opened until a month or two before they're actually about to be released. I believe the environment that the barrel has in there should stay as it is with the bung in, rather than just keep tasting. It's not my style. It's a patient person's game, is the way I see it anyway. So
you can start.
Lee and Bree are laughing.
I just say we're not very patient. We're tasting them all the time.
Yeah, I think we're on your team.
Yeah. We have one barrel that we just love, and the Angel share is going to be massive.
Yeah.
I'm worried about our red gum casks. They're going to be.
Yeah, that was very nice, by the way.
Because it's sort of the thing people that come want to taste. So you end up sort of, okay, well, yeah, you keep going at it. But yeah.
Josh, you had something then?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what are you planning to do with the casks? Are you going to refill? Are you going to do a second fill, or are you going to move them on after? Or
yeah, so the first lot we've done, we have done second fills in them. We got a lot of flavour out of them. I mean, the whiskies were very a lot of flavour, like very, very potent in terms of what they delivered, which was fantastic. And I do like that sort of whiskey, which is good. So we have gone for a second fill. I mean, when we make the new make, we make a lot of cuts in terms of the heads to remove as much of the volatiles as we can. So we're not really relying on the barrel to do the filtering in terms of the carbon. So I'm not concerned about that on the second fill. It'd be interesting to see what what they do. But we are starting to talk to some other people in New South Wales around what they can do in terms of using the barrels to reinvigorate them, and then almost creating a new style of whiskey, as it were, from that, and starting to drive it. But it's just in conversations at the moment, so it's not really something to put out there. But it is very much around trying to keep it within the family of New South Wales, if we can, and specifically in the Riverina, because we do really like the products that come out of there.
Yeah, mate. Well, look, I think from what I'm seeing coming through it, and from myself, we're very excited about what happens in the future. And so hopefully this year, before Christmas, we'll see this barrel on oak barrel shelves and in bars and things.
Yep. We'd love to see it on the oak.
Yeah.
Are you still wearing a suit? Ed, you're still wearing a suit now, or is this your full-time job?
No, this is it now. Both myself and Julie, day in, day out, we slog it out and do it. So yeah. No, we were pushing through. I think with the amount of time required, and I mean, obviously also trying to sell into restaurants and that sort of thing, it's very difficult to not do it all the time. I think, being in Sydney too, we probably have a little bit of an advantage in terms of being closer to people that we can go and see and touch base. It would be harder. Like, I would imagine it would be harder if you were regional to do it. I mean, even deliveries, when we were talking earlier, I mean, my courier comes around twice a day. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, even sending to Victoria. I mean, if I get a pickup in the morning, generally you've got it the next day at the latest.
Our courier is still on horse and cart. Yeah. About that quick.
Yeah. So sorry.
Well, maybe what we can do is we can all ship our pallets up to you, Ed, and then you can
You just throw some.
Not on Kathleen's listening. Careful.
Cheers, Ed. Thanks for that. And please, just stick around as we chat. But I want to throw to a whiskey that I have been putting off trying. I haven't actually tried this until right now. This is actually the first time ever that we've invited a distiller or distillers back to 2 years in a row to the Distillers Dinner. Normally you get one go, then you come back. I think, Joshy, you were there, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I think about 4 or 5, yep.
Yeah, so that's taken that long until you got back. But to Lee and Brie Atwood, who made their sort of debut last year. Lee came along to the Distillers Dinner, and then they took it in turns to attack the Whisky Fair. Before the whiskey was ready,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because we had the kids in the hotel room, so someone had to.
Yeah. But yes, we had big plans to do a lot of things up here this year in Sydney, and obviously that's been paid to a little bit. But congratulations on a great launch a few weeks ago and a fantastic tasting with Whisky Name It down in Melbourne with your first release, and it's my great pleasure to crack open, and for everyone at home, to crack open the backwards. We chose the single malt to fit in with everything else tonight, but we do have both the single malt and the rye available from about 10 minutes ago on the website of the very first release from backwards. So, guys, how are you doing? Hopefully the storm hasn't hit you yet.
I think we're all good still. Yep.
Yeah, we're good. It's pretty clear out there. We're good.
It's dark. It's not time.
Well, it's dark. Yeah.
No, we're going well. We've gotten through that sort of 2 weeks after the launch where we got all the orders out, and it was pretty hectic. So we sent all the we launched the week after stage 4 hit Melbourne. That was good timing. When workforce went down by 30%, and we had the kids homeschooling that week as well. So it was all pretty crazy, but we hit send, and 24 hours later it was all gone, both releases. So it was good. We were sort of nervous about releasing the two together, the rye and the single malt, but we just went for it. And I think it was quite good because a lot of people bought a bottle of each. So I like to think that maybe some of the real hardcore single malt drinkers might be tasting rye right now for the first time, and I know a lot of people did do that. It's a pretty interesting side-by-side tasting. So, it went well, better than we could have really hoped for. We're pretty tired now.
Yeah. I can imagine with everything else that's going on as well. I mean, we sort of ummed and ahed about whether we would do the rye tonight or the single malt, but I think we did the rye version last year, so we'll do the single malt here. Do you want to just take us through, briefly the journey to this point, and then what it's in this, what's in my glass here, and a few comments coming through. People have obviously jumped the gun and opened their bottles when I've been patiently waiting for 3 weeks. Corey says it's amazing. Anyone that doesn't have the glorious product that Lee and Brie have produced, do it while they are available. And that's why I do this 2 weeks later, is because I'm the only one that's got any bottles left. Everyone else is out. So
it's very true. Yeah.
Do you want to do the journey and I can do the...
Okay. We both grew up in the Northeast. So we had lived away for the last 15 or so years. We moved, as most people do when they're 18, they get given a toaster and a doona and told to move out of home. So we did that and, travelled and lived overseas and lived in Melbourne and then had our 2 boys there and decided we wanted to get back to the Northeast and, settle our lives here. So I suppose we started looking for property, and then this beautiful space in Yackandandah came up, and within like 3 months, we bought the house, sold our other house, got jobs, and we were moving up here, and it was just a whirlwind. And at the same time, we'd sort of been, getting into drinking whiskey. And when we moved up here, it sort of, we were reading a lot about Sullivan's Cove actually, and the climate in Tassie and how the high country climate was sort of quite similar. So we moved to Yak, and I don't know if people know Yackandandah, and we're going to call it Yak for most of that time. So it's old gold rush country, and it's a beautiful little heritage town in the high country, sort of near Beechworth and Bright, Myrtleford, places like that. And it just seemed like a perfect setting for making whiskey. And normally Lee would do like a really long history lesson on gold rush and sly grog and booze in the high. He really would love to do it tonight, but it's not the time. He's a history teacher.
That's the after hours. You've got to pay more for access to that.
Only the diehard for that.
I don't know, and I don't know if we should charge people for it, but anyway, so it just seemed like a perfect place. And Lee's a school teacher, and he took a term off to settle the family in, and he was, really good at that. And he went down to Tassie and met a bunch of distillers down there for that time. And he came back and he was like, they're just making whiskey in their sheds. Like, I think we could actually do it. Like, let's buy a still, let's do it. And I was like, what's happened to you? But then, I don't know, it didn't take long to kind of start, putting it all together. And we'd sold a house in Melbourne. So we had, for the first time in our lives, a bit of money behind us, and we spent it all on Sylvester. So then we were broke again. But a year later, we had him, in the shed, and we were a bit similar. We got ATO approval to produce on the property, which was lucky, because then we could just set up and, learn our mashing and learn how to, use Sylvester. And while Sylvester was being built, we had a 20-litre little still that we were playing around with. We were mashing in an esky in the kitchen and doing, and then upgraded to, what's the mash tun? 1,000 litre mash tun. And, we had that fabricated from an old milk vat. We got an old soft drink mixer as our fermenter. And then we had this pretty amazing 1,250 litre still installed. So Sylvester was like, the star of the show. And then we had all this sort of farm equipment around him, which is still how we're rolling now. I suppose, like just listening to, to Ed before and sort of what he was saying about malts and to Stu and Naomi and what they were saying about malts, like, that first kind of was almost 12 months when we were waiting for the still to be built. I mashed like crazy, and I just learned about malts and what they do. Like Ed, we use Voyager, and we have a pretty close relationship with them. And so I suppose I've just sort of learned about what each malt can add, and not just the single malt that people are maybe tasting tonight, but the rye as well. Just so much work went into those mash bills, and hours and hours of mashing. And even just tipping things out and just starting again, and to kind of find that we wanted. So
yeah, it's a lot of fun, but yeah, like that exactly. It's sweat and tears that have gone into it. But yeah. So I suppose I mentioned before sort of that what the inspiration was for us trying to sort of create something that represents the area that Bree kind of described of Yakandanda. We love it here, and
I think having grown up here too, we have such a strong connection to the region that it's part of our story, and we couldn't disconnect the two. Like we are so proud of this area, and even when we didn't live here, when we lived away, we were back here all the time, and my dad was a farmer, and like we were always meeting winemakers and cheesemakers and artisan bakers, and so I suppose it's the whole story of the region that we're trying to tap into and promote because we're so proud of it. So making a product that is really crafted in the Victorian high country is an important part of what we're doing, I suppose.
Yeah, and like sort of, I guess even down to our branding, like, it sort of looks like Yakandanda. It looks like other things in Yakandanda. It kind of really fits. So we're really proud of the way that our product's really now starting to kind of fit into that, into that sort of environment that was already here, and we've tapped into it. But,
So using Voyager was important. They're sort of the closest, I suppose. Do you think?
Yeah. Well, the river end is sort of just across the border there, so it's we consider that close enough to call local.
3 hours. That's pretty good.
So within the single malt tonight, the mash bill. So Ed mentioned before as well the Latrobe variety. So we've got some of that in here too, and we've found that after fermenting and distilling that I guess it's a malt that's normally used for lighter style lagers and things like that, a brewer's malt. So you get this really nice, delicate, fruity, floral kind of spirit off it. We also use one of their schooner varieties, which sort of put Voyager on the map in the brewing world. It's sort of a much more earthy kind of malt. It's got sort of a, more of a grassy kind of hay feel to it. So we use that, and we also use a little bit of like a toasted schooner malt, which is kind of like a crystal malt in brewing. It's their voodoo variety, and it's that really brings those sort of caramel and honey notes to it. So I suppose what's really exciting for us that like knowing what the new make is and then seeing it go into cask, we can to be able to taste those things in the way that they've carried over. You're going to charge
Josh is advertising you well.
How many bottles have you got left?
Joshy, I actually forgot to grab the empties to bring down. So can you actually hold one up for me, because I haven't done. Yeah, thank you. So to show what the lagging's like, because I actually don't have one in arm's reach at the moment.
Thanks, guys.
Teamwork, mate.
And I suppose the cask it's gone into as well. I suppose we're close to
Rutherglen.
We're close to Rutherglen, which is a pretty well-known fortified area. So we really wanted our first release to be something that sort of it was a bit of a tilt of the hat to those guys. We got some tawny casks that were recoopered to 100 litre, and so the single malt was a vatting of those 4 casks, northeast tawny. That's what's in your glass tonight. So probably the other thing I could mention was, and someone said something earlier about, I think maybe was it Ed, someone said it had a sort of spiciness to the spirit, and I don't mind telling people what yeast we use, because I think it does add a bit of spice to our single malt. And some people ask if it is any of the rye influence in there, but we use a Belgian ale yeast.
Stop it!
Don't do it, Lee. Don't do it.
No.
Shut him up. He's had too much to drink.
It's all right. I don't have the patience to go through that year of so I'm not going to bother.
So the Belgian ale yeast adds a bit of a spiciness that I really love to the single malt. We also use that on our rye too. Like it sort of goes spice on spice, and it works. Belgian ale yeast is great, and it ferments out, and it also
except when it's really cold.
Yeah. But it's a great yeast. I do use a little bit of distiller's yeast in there as well, just to finish it up.
All right, Leroy. Next question.
What brand of distiller's yeast, mate?
Yeah. We're all
same as you, Stu.
If hypothetically I was looking to what's the bloke's number? Just hypothetically.
Just sign it to us.
Well,
Work for the Belgian East Company.
Well, to both of you again, congratulations, because this is excellent, and this is just such a great whiskey. And for those who have been unfortunate enough to drink whiskey with me for an extended period over the last few years, something that I love is texture. I always like the way a whiskey feels, and this is actually something that I find very similar to Tim Boone whiskies, is just that softness on the palate. You know, it's still whiskey, it's still 48%, but it's just got a beautiful softness. And, you know, I'm going to say the word velvety again. It's a different sort of velvety to what we had on Ed's ACD, because that was obviously at 66, that's a bit bigger, and it was like coating. This is a little bit more melting, if that makes sense, in my Scott's wanky whiskey tasting note of the night. But yeah, and a big shout out to Michael on the Facebook, who is drinking a lot at home because he has whiskies from all of you, 4 bottles at the moment. So good on him.
Good job, mate.
Scott,
I have to say, my favourite tasting notes we've had from a reviewer was, he said it tasted like licking the back of the spoon after cooking with mum, like brown sugar and butter. I loved that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure my only tasting note for this one is delicious.
Thanks, Fred.
Yeah, and I do hate talking about price when it comes to whiskey, but this is about $135 for members at 48%. So we're not mucking around when we say value for this as well. So, congrats. So I mean, this is the first release. Once you know I sell out tonight, it's gone. What does the future hold for Backwards? Like, are they going to be in similarly sized batches moving forward, or
Are they going forwards or backwards?
Nice one, dude. Dad joke.
So
First time ever.
I suppose, we're sort of moving forward in batches, but we kind of have I guess now we're kind of producing with the idea of what our core range will be. But we have tried things and experimented a lot in the first few years to sort of find what bottles match our spirit the best. So there's going to be batches, like sort of releases over the next probably 18 months before we sort of lock into our core range. But yeah, so I suppose coming up, we've got a couple of exciting things. We're gonna do a single cask release, and we're going to do our next rye will be, whereas the last one was French oak, this one's going to be American oak. But again, wine. So rye is just so cool in wine casks because it's got the guts to stand up to a wine cask. So they're heaps of fun. And a single cask, single malt, which is French oak. So that's what's on the very near horizon.
And the red gum,
the
red gum casks looking likely by the end of the year.
Yeah, sort of November, December, which is cool. Yeah, we've sort of had a lot of interest in those, and they're tasting really, really great. So,
we've had a space. We've been leasing a space for the last few months that we're opening. Well, we were hoping to have the distillery door open this month, but in time for the release. But obviously, everything going on hasn't been the best time. So we're hoping by the end of the year we'll have that open in Yakandanda. So I suppose we wanted to make sure we had whiskey to stock that. So that was sort of our plan for this year, was to make sure we had some releases out so that when people do come and visit the distillery door, it's, we've got, a selection of whiskies for them to taste and share with us. So yeah, although we haven't had that plan fall into place, at least the release went well, so we know we're on the right track somewhere.
I think it's going to be a big party, Bree, when you guys open. Like, we'll all be out of lockdown and we'll be like,
everyone here has to come.
I got lots of friends that live on the border. There's some party boats I can use to cross if need be.
We can't wait.
But yeah, I think Kathleen, the fairy godmother of Australian spirits, I pointed a little bit earlier, and I was actually going to bring it up, so thank you did that. The spy shots of the cellar door, distillery door look excellent at the moment. So that should be a lot of fun. And what sort of accommodation is there in Yakandanda these days? It's been a few years.
We've got a spare room.
For 40?
There's a few pubs, 2 pubs and a motel. You'll be right.
Yeah, sweet.
We'll hook out with a local. Just a room.
There we go.
Okay.
Bring up Dean again, are you?
There's a reason why we. There's a reason why we don't, broadcast Distillers Dinner normally. But,
have a bit of fun around in the backyard. I can bring my tent.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got 5 acres, so yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Also, there's a dodgy B&B behind the supermarket too that we stayed at.
Oh yeah, that's
And for those, funnily enough, in places like Timboon and Melbourne, my family gathers every Easter at Beechworth because it is basically the halfway point between Sydney and sort of Cobden, wider Melbourne where we all live. So for those in Melbourne and Timboon, maybe we need to do our own family meetup halfway at Yakandanda.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everyone's invited.
Yep.
But yeah, look, thanks guys. Excellent work. It's just so good I was hoping we'd be able to doing it at a pub here this week, but it's great to share one of your whiskies with you finally. So congratulations.
Thanks,
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Fun, guys. Done well.
Now I had initially, when I did the thing up for tonight, put that we would do Timboon next and then go on to a Sullivan's Cove. And I'm thinking I might put it up to Fred and Josh because one is 47.8, 47.5, and the other one is 69.69. So, I mean, I haven't tried the Sullivans yet. How delicate is the Sullivans, Fred? Should we do that next, or what do you reckon, Josh?
Yeah, I'm happy with whatever you reckon, Scotty.
I mean, it's not a shrinking violet, but it's also not 69%. So
yeah, okay. So for those who had pre-poured, we're going to move around. We might jump into Sullivan's Cove, and then Josh's internet and power seems to be holding out, so we might keep you on.
Yeah, we're all good here.
Sorry, mate.
We'll go all night.
But this is, I mean, this one for me is really fascinating because I know, Fred, we spoke for about half an hour when we were talking about this, what whiskey you wanted to do, and I know. We normally do one Sullivan's Cove tasting a year at the Oak Barrel. We sort of get together, and in the past, we've gone and picked 18 and 19-year-old whiskies, which is excellent to drink 18, 19-year-old Australian whiskies. But I think we both came to the agreement that for tonight and for the journey, like cask 85 and 80 that preceded it was the right thing to do because it's such a great story of we've got three distilleries, first release, halfway through onto the next releases. Moving into like almost to 2 years now with Chief Son. This is a very special release that tells a fair bit of history about Sullivan's Cove Cask 85, which is on the website now at a very, very special price. Thank you to Sullivan's Cove. It'll be gone before I finish this sentence, but so I've said it. Don't yell at me when it sells out. Thank you. But yeah, Fred, tell me about this.
So this is, as you said, like it's a pretty cool story behind this whiskey. So it's 14 years old, which is obviously right up there for Australian whiskey. I think it's funny sometimes when we speak to people internationally and we talk about our whiskeys being 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, and they go, yeah, sure, you can get that out of Scotland all the time, and people don't necessarily understand obviously that the climatic conditions here in Australia are completely different. So I tell people, obviously there are some differences, but I tell people it's actually a lot closer to Kentucky than it is to Scotland in terms of the overall sort of climatic conditions, in that you can get a perfectly tasty whiskey in Australia in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, no dramas. So when you are actually aging something for sort of 13, 14 years, it's pretty out there. So it's a 14-year-old whiskey. It is aged in a 300-litre American oak cask that is a refill cask. So it previously held an earlier batch of Sullivan's Cove. And so you can really see the entire history of the sort of 26-year history of Sullivan's Cove Distillery in this one whiskey. Because in the very, very early days, sort of the first era of Sullivan's Cove between 1994 and 1999, a lot of what was being filled were 300-litre uncharred virgin American oak casks. And, Ed, interesting to hear you say that you're using just sort of like lightly toasted French oak and stuff like that as well, because it's not particularly common. Although pretty interesting. Now I was at sitting in on a Nicker tasting last night, and they actually use a fair amount of virgin American oak casks in their vattings and stuff like that these days. But certainly in the Australian whiskey industry, not particularly common to use casks that haven't had something in them already. And so the original crew at Sullivan's Cove had these big 300-litre American oak casks, specially commissioned, from the cooperage direct to the distillery, and they weren't charred, they were only lightly toasted. And I don't know where they got the idea from that, because it was such a sort of strange idea for how to mature whiskey. The only thing I can think is that they were drinking a lot of California Chardonnay at the time and thought...
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, we'll just get some big sort of like really sort of powerful kind of American oak. So rather than thinking, oh, okay, we'll use small casks and get something to market a little bit quicker, they were thinking, all right, we'll use basically virgin casks and pack a whole ton of oak flavor into these whiskeys in a short period of time. To be perfectly honest with you, and anyone who's tried the sort of first generation of Sullivan's Cove can attest to the fact that the resulting whiskeys were not very good. Small. Yeah, I see Scotty doing his death gestures over there. It's
pieces of history, lovely pieces of history.
Look, it's a learning curve. I'm sure everyone here can attest to that. You know what I mean? Not everything that you make is gonna work out. So that stuff was, it was pretty rough. But what then happened was we ended up refilling a lot of those casks, and most of them got charred after the first sort of batch of whiskey was decanted. Then we did send them back to the cooperage, got them recharred so that they actually had like a proper layer of char on the inside of them, and then filled them up again. And that was 14 years ago. So you're really seeing we're now at a point now, 26 years on, where we've got 2 entire cycles of sort of 12-year plus whiskey to release. And certainly when it comes to refill casks, this is the result. So this year is the first year that we've released any of these refill casks as single cask bottlings. We're doing what we're calling these kind of cask variation series, where we have these stripes through the labels to basically say to people, there's our core range at Sullivan's being American Oak X Bourbon and French Oak X Tawny generally. So when we have something that's a little different like that, so these casks never held bourbon in them, so we can't put it in that standard American Oak X Bourbon label. So we created these kind of stripy ones to denote that we're doing something a little bit different. Yeah, and I think they're pretty interesting whiskeys. I think they're pretty cool. But yeah, like I said, this is the first time around that we have ever released them. A lot of these refill casks, and we do sometimes reuse our French Oak X Tawny casks as well. A lot of those will end up in our vatted expressions, because they've got the texture and the structure and all the kind of malt character that you want, but sometimes they're just not that interesting sort of on the nose as a standalone single cask release. So we'll vat them together with sort of brighter, jumpier, more kind of lively casks to sort of balance that stuff out. But with a couple of them, we tasted them on their own and went, no, that's a cracking whiskey. We just need to put that in a bottle. So yeah, this is the second cask that we've released of this one, and there's a couple more on the way. But yeah, it's certainly not the majority of what we're producing at Sullivan's.
I think I do this once a year, Fred, and to Heather as well from the distillery, and it's apologise, because I have a great job and I get to try new things every day, every week. They come across my desk, and sometimes I forget why Sullivan's is Sullivan's, why people talk about Sullivan's the way they do. And every time I go back, you just go, oh, yeah, okay, that's why. Because it was just, everything is done with unrushed, with, the ultimate, attention and no expense spared. And it just shows on this. And I think, as Sullivan's been the gold standard, a lot of things they've done in terms of like refill barrels and the Australian whiskey industry, like there's a lot out there now, but not to the extent of, 14 years of pop in refills. This is the gold standard as far as I'm concerned of what refill barrels can do. So I do apologise for ever doubting anything they do, not thinking that you're 100%, because I just forget sometimes.
Not at all. Thank you. And look, it's funny that, you mentioned texture before, and I think that this whiskey and the amount of time that it's spent in a barrel that is not necessarily giving a huge amount of character. I like to think of this as a pretty spirit-forward whiskey. And it's really nice to hear the rest of you guys talk about the malt and how much work you're doing in it. I was participating in another forum of Australian distillers recently, and it was interesting because there were some questions coming through on the chat that was sort of saying, oh, what about the malt? What about the malt? What about the yeast and all that kind of stuff? And a lot of people were saying, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because by the time it's sat in a cask, because we are using these, big, sort of small format fortified wine casks and stuff, and they're going, it doesn't matter. You're only going to be able to taste the cask by the end of it anyway. And I was sort of sitting there going, oh, that's a bit of a shame because obviously, as we all know, the malt is hugely important. Like you can't. It's the only.
I think I was listening to that. And we were like shaking our heads, going, "What?"
That's it. It's like it's literally the only ingredient in whiskey, right? So how can it not be important?
Except for yeast, of course.
Yeah.
Belgian triple yeast or something like
Write it down there.
That's it. I'll be taking that straight back to the crew. But and
She's done backwards, Sullivan's backwards.
For a salesman for the yeast company, though.
Yeah.
It's good you talk about refills, though, Fred, because we've had some refills down now for a couple of years, full French oak Apira, and the whiskey coming out of them is just amazing. Like there's nothing wrong with refills. Like the whiskey's not ready, but it's just softer, more delicate, emphasizes the malt. So we love the future of where we go with our refills.
Absolutely. And look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with bottling a whiskey at 2 years old if it's delicious, and we all know that, and I think we've all done it. But at the same time, there are certain processes that happen in a cask over time that have got nothing to do with oak influence, right? There are all sorts of other processes that happen inside the cask over a long period of time. And if you're using a really heavy, aggressive cask because it's super heavily charred or because it's absolutely soaked in tawny or apera or whatever it is, you're not going to ever see those characteristics develop because the cask is just going to overpower them. So, there's a million different ways to get a good whiskey, and leaving whiskey alone in a refill cask for a long time is definitely one of them. And certainly we see that coming out of Scotland, right? Like when you see a 30, 40, 50-year-old Scotch whiskey, if that's in a first fill sherry butt, not very good. Like I've tasted 50-year-old Scotch whiskies that I was like, well, that should have been pulled out of the cask 30 years ago. You know what I mean? The really, really good old scotches, the 30, 40, 50-year-old scotches that I've tasted that I've just thought, oh my God, this is absolutely, nectar of the gods, have been the ones that have been sitting around in second, third, fourth fill casks and just allowed to rest for that amount of time, and all the other amazing characteristics that you see from the malt itself that develop. And it's been nice to hear all of you guys talk about, trying to use local malt and stuff like that as well, because that's what we do at Sullivan's. We only use Tasmanian malt, and Sullivan, Tasmania has been a really important barley growing region in Australia all the way back to the 1820s, to colonial days. But, barley was planted there very, very early on. And, obviously when we start to talk about regionality, it's a bit silly to try to define things on the basis purely of region, because there are so many different variables. But that Tasmanian malt is something that we're really proud of, and we're really do our best to try to showcase that in the same way that everybody else on here is doing, by using sort of low and slow fermentations to try to bring out the character of that malt and try to preserve it, same way that we run our stills, again, nice and low and slow, and trying to preserve a lot of that texture and a lot of that flavor. And yeah, I guess it's an important part of our whiskey making process, because you can, another way of doing it is obviously to create a pretty clean, pretty simple new make spirit and chuck it in a tasty barrel, and that's totally fine. But it's a different thing if you're really trying to focus on the flavor of the malt and what's actually going to come out of the barrel in a few years.
A couple of comments coming through here. Raf in the Zoom chat says he's getting toasted coconut, but in a very good way. Quick shout out to Corey as well, who I believe has placed an order because it looks like he's got a very big smile on his face. At the risk of sounding like, TVSN, like, and so-and-so's bought one now, only 3 left, I think. Which I think I'd be quite, would you buy skincare off me? I think I'd be pretty good at that job. And to Regan, I think, who was here last night as well, very good comment that we touched on last night, was looking forward to more malt-forward whiskies rather than cask-powered Australian whiskies, and I think there's a real movement for that. But this question I want to sort of throw to everyone a little bit, because now, as of a month ago, Lee and Bree, you're now involved in refill casks as well to a certain extent. Darren asks, what was beer used to clean the barrels and draw whiskey out before refill? And I want to expand on that and just sort of ask everyone, is anyone doing anything special to their casks before they refill them? Are they recharring, giving them a 1 month fill of something, or any of that going on?
Can I tell a story about us and what we decided to do?
Absolutely.
This is all about me, of course. Great. Off you go.
So when we emptied our barrels, we thought that we would reinvigorate them by charring them. And everybody loves fire, right? So we went out, we got the gas cylinder, we got the blowtorch, big blowtorch, set up the video. We've got some great footage of charring the barrels, fire coming out, whatever else. I went to pick up the barrel into a gazillion staves.
Yeah.
So now we have stave artwork. We've got staves to show the distillery what the inside of a barrel looks like and how the charring works.
But if you're not a cooper, when you take the head off a barrel and it's wet, it's fine. And when you char it, it does that. So you can't actually get it back in the damn barrel. Yeah. So we don't do that anymore.
That's a really, really good way to wreck your investment.
Stuart, I just noticed, Stuart, what have you done with your ponytail that you had last time I saw you?
Ponytail? Oh, you mean my beard?
Yeah, or just everything, all that hair that you've lost with all that fire going straight up.
Yeah. I thought you were talking about me going bald. Yeah. You can see that from there.
We don't do anything to our barrel.
Oh, no, we do. We do this. We do the cask expression stuff. So we work with the breweries and they nick our barrels and fill them full of beer for 1 or 2 years, and then we refill them full of whiskey. And that's choice. That is really good. Completely different whiskey. But that's just a brief one.
Yeah, I mean, awesome, Fred. Like, thank you for giving us access to this. I mean, we're a little, again, if we're going to pick out a silver lining of 2020, it's that there's not as many tourists down in Sullivan's Cove at the cellar door, so we get a little bit more access to some of those bottles sometimes. So thank you for allowing a couple of them for us to drink tonight. It's always a great pleasure and a privilege. It's not a right, it's a privilege to try Sullivan sometimes. But I am going to use this barrel chat as a bit of a segue to talk not necessarily about the Tim Boone whiskey you're about to try, but Tim Boone's new association with a craft cooperage, which is not a lot of things that distilleries around the world can say, having access to a cooperage. So Josh, who had to flee the distillery if you weren't here earlier because Tim Boone is in a power outage at the moment. He's found a generator and some whiskey to keep him warm. Can you tell us a bit about the cooperage that you've got working with at the moment?
Yeah, Scotty. So I suppose we've been going about 13 years now at Tim Boone, and we're into some refill casks that have been down 5+ years as well, and we're getting quite a lot of barrels that were coming off, and breweries, wineries, and all that were asking for them, and also when we were buying casks in, we didn't exactly know what was inside, how heavy the char was, and that sort of thing. So my father-in-law is a retired dairy farmer, or was a retiring dairy farmer, and was really good with woodwork. And we started training him up as a cooper about 2.5 years ago now. And we've started up our own cooperage to add on to the distillery. And we've set it up out on our beef farm in a big shed. And now we buy in sort of truckloads of barrels. We've got a truckload coming on Monday, and we sort of get to pull them apart and pick the eyes out of each one, and use the best ones at Tim Boone and move the rest on up to backwards.
He's got a one-upper on the grain too. You can one-up everyone on the grain too, because we all try and use local grain, but now you're growing your own.
we got a few acres, so
overachieving, Josh.
Yeah,
I'm glad you went last because I might go.
Yeah, so yeah, we've got our own bee farm as well, and we've sacrificed a paddock this year for our own estate grown barley. So hopefully in 5 or so years' time, we'll be have a full estate grown single malt whiskey.
Yeah, that's very exciting. It's something that not a lot of distilleries in the world can lay claim to, but we now have a few in Australia. Obviously, Peter Bignell down at Belgrave in Tassie has been doing it from day dot. But Juwaja, just south of where we are here in Sydney, a few hours, they've got estate grown barley at the moment. So I mean, that's all very, very exciting. But let us move on to a whiskey which, when we announced that Whisky Fair couldn't happen this year, which was, no one had their surprise faced on when that was announced. But we release, a lot of exclusives, well, not a lot, but a few exclusives every year. And this year we sort of had a Ben Riach cask on the water, which has been delayed. So that one was coming. Lucky enough to bottle in an Archie Rose cask, which we're launching next week. But the one that I kept getting emails and calls about was whether there would be a Shaggers Reserve for this year's. And Shaggers Reserve, I honestly don't know how it started. I can't remember. I'm sure I was there, but I don't know how it started. But Shaggers Reserve has been a Whisky Fair now / Forum exclusive for the past 3 years from Tin Boone. Really bold, rich, brash, but eminently drinkable whiskies. And the people asked, and we're very happy to report that Josh and Caitlin Walker at the Tin Boone Distillery have delivered with the very first tasting of Tin Boone Distillery Shaggers Reserve Mark III tonight. So do you remember how Shaggers Reserve started?
Yeah, Scotty, I think it was, it's a few years ago now, but you and Kath got together and said we should do a bit of a one-off for the Whisky Fair. And I think I just sent up about 4 or 5 samples just straight out of the cask. And I said, just have a play with them, guys, and see what you think. And because we don't dilute before we go into the cask, so we just go straight in at 71, 72% alcohol. And our whiskies generally go down a little bit over time. And it ended up at 69%. And I think you guys just said, well, why don't you just bottle at that? And then obviously you're Scotty, you're a nickname Shagger, and the Shaggers Reserve was born. So a lucky one. And obviously we got the density meter working to 69.69 for this one, for this fair as well, which is a bit hard.
Within 0.5, I assume.
Yeah. So how lucky is that? 3 years in a row, exactly 69.69%.
Yeah, 4 years ago, mate, I put it in at straight at that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been it's amazing. I had 2 blokes ring the distillery last week asking if it was going to be available this year, and very rarely do we get anyone ringing up asking if there's going to be a special release of something. So it's grown and grown.
Yeah. So before we get into this, it has gone. So I think we should see it here either next week or the week after. As we've sort of explained, so, moving things around at the moment is a little bit problematic, but it has gone live tonight. It's in 200 ml bottles, exactly the same as last year. 69 bottles in total. What a surprise! How good's that? Those 69 bottle casks are just great at 69%. It's on a special price up until tonight, and I've seen a few orders come through, so that's awesome. But I mean, what do you look for when you're looking for a Shaggers Reserve release in the barrel house? What does a cask have to say?
Yeah, well, it's got to be pretty drinkable, obviously, straight out of the barrel. So I do all my tastings just straight from the cask, and I have a bit of a whiteboard, I suppose, of the next 10 barrels that should be ready to bottle. And every now and then we get one that's going along really well, and sometimes it's actually probably over oaked a little bit. And when that happens, something like this, we either do a special bottling for the cellar door only, so we don't let it out of the cellar door. Bearing in mind, I should say that we sell most of our whiskey at Tin Boone over the cellar door, so not a lot of it gets out of there. But when something like this comes up, we bottle it straight from the barrel as is, and it's really, really drinkable. It's about 4 years old in a 100-litre barrel, American oak, X20 Seppelsfield. and we do a really heavy char to all their barrels. So extremely heavy crocodile char. But I mean, we bottled this one today at midday, and I had a taste, and the finish is still going now. It's a big boy, so just go easy on it.
Lots of fun. Quick shout out to friend of the Oak Barrel, Jane Overing, who's on the Facebook chat there, saying g'day to everyone. She's listening in, having a few laughs. And actually, Jane, if you're free next Tuesday, I have had the Ben Riach tasting be pushed back a couple of weeks, so I've got a gap in forum. If you're interested, maybe we need to do Overeem comeback tasting. So I'll call you next week. But I want to read out Kathleen Davies' tasting notes for Shag Reserve Mark III. Get off my lawn. This is Meg Ryan in a glass. It's like Tim Boone bottled dip toffee and bonfire ash. A happy but sticky shagadelic ending for sure that won't disappoint. Serious whiskey flavors. So I think that probably sums it up. Well, and I think everything about this whiskey, and I think why we sort of started doing it at the start was just to make sure that everything was fun. And Whisky Fair Week, there's some pretty serious booze on the tables, and it's a big day, and you can't try everything, and it's designed like that way. But to make sure that we're having fun with whiskey, and I think this does it aplomb. It's as you say, it's not a small whiskey. It's got plenty to say and kick about, but it's lots of fun.
Yeah, I think too, Scotty. It's good to not take it too seriously and have a few jokes, and if you can get a cracking whiskey out of it as well and share it with everyone, well, everyone gets to take home a bottle of it. It's great.
Yeah, and while we are having a bit of fun, I do want to sort of just check in with you, because you've had a pretty tough year with your distillery. Obviously, as you said before, you're on you sell a lot through the distillery. You're on a tourist trail. Before pandemics, you had bushfires put an end to that, and then before that, in a previous life, I don't remember 2019. I don't think anyone does, but there was droughts and that sort of thing. But I know that you've done a lot in terms of you were sending hay up to New South Wales farmers from around your local region, and doing a lot to help local dairy farms and things, because you can't ship ice cream and milk like you can whiskey. So I know you've been doing a lot, and 2020 just seems to keep kicking you to make sure that you feel it. So just to check in and make sure, how are you and the family, but also how's Tim Boone as a town going?
Yeah, it's funny, Scotty. Like the first lockdown, I think everyone it was a bit of a novelty, I suppose, and people were actually enjoying just sitting at home for a few weeks and having a bit of time off. But this time, it's got a totally different feel. We've actually shut the distillery fully now through the week and just open on weekends, but there's absolutely no one around. Like it's an absolute ghost town, Tim Boone now. It's sort of like it was 10 years ago before the tourist boom kicked off down here. It's a bit scary, but we were able to open in June, and you could see when it did open up that people want to get out and they want to spend and they want to support small business. So that was really promising, and look, we just hope to get open again in September, and we part of the local farming community as well. So we lucky enough to I was organised a few loads of hay to go up to Mendooran in New South Wales last year, and try and chip into the community where I can. So it's all good. It all comes around. So we'll just bunker down and get through it, mate, and hopefully it's a good summer on the horizon.
Yeah, and when it comes to 2021 and we can travel again, and I fly down to Melbourne and I go visit Wisconsin and Elysian and Starwood, and then the next day I want to hire a car and go and visit some things. How far away is Tim Boone from Melbourne?
Yeah, so it's about 2.5 hours from the top of the Westgate Bridge normally. So depends where you are in Melbourne, but if you're coming over the Westgate, it's 2.5 hours, and if you go via the coast along the 12 Apostles, it's you could probably add an extra couple of hours, but it's a beautiful drive, and you can stay in Tim Boone and sample the wares there and go
You're
back
better
to
off
Scotty's home.
coming via us though, Scotty, first.
I was going to say, which order do you do it in?
No, stay away from the
Come
east.
to us first.
It's a good drive, Scotty. It's worth doing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do have some family in Cobden, so it's a good bike ride from Cobden down to Tim Boone.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I got there last time.
Yeah. I don't remember the ride back. It always feels uphill somehow.
Wind blows in your face.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so Josh, outside, and this is a very, very special release. It's very, Distillers Dinner. Once this is gone, we won't see this. But I was lucky enough to try a Governor's Reserve of yours a couple of weeks ago, which had a faint taste of peat in it, which might be, there you go, returning the favour from Yakandanda there. Is that a bit of a hint? Is peated whiskey on the radar for Tim Boone?
Yeah, it is actually. We've got a fairly big allocation down of peated whiskey coming up later this year. So we hope to have a permanent line of peated coming on sort of around Christmas or just after. We thought I actually placed one into a few little 20-litre casks just to see how it had come along, and that's what we released in the Governor's Reserve. With another barrel there that you've got. It's pretty exciting and something different for us. Normally we're pretty straight down the line with our mash profile and do the same thing there, and then alter our barrels. That's traditionally what we've done, but we changed the peat up a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, and looking forward to it. Something a bit different.
That Shaggers 3 was beautiful. It was really nice.
Yeah, it's pretty big, isn't it?
I have to admit, I had to put a bit of that in there as well, and that made it. It opened it up massively. It's just,
couple of small drops of water, and that's just opened up absolutely beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of lubrication jokes to be made there, but we won't touch that. That's all right.
Funny how we had a single barrel release of barrel 69. And it went pretty quickly as well.
Yeah. I've got one left, I'm pretty sure.
Remember when we launched our Founders Club, we just gave out numbers in sequential order and someone requested number 69.
So, Ed, what number barrel are you up to at the moment, mate?
Me?
Yeah.
No, it's 7 will be next.
7.
How much for barrel 69?
Little bit to go.
You have to wait, mate.
Yeah, a little while.
I think
right.
I think in a few weeks we'll actually lay down barrel 69.
Yeah. Yes, and we have officially hit the level of silliness that does come along with Distillers Dinner in the flesh. So it's good to see that even in virtual times, some things stay the same. If anyone's got any final questions on the chats, please get them in now. But I do want to say a big thank you to everyone. It's been so far, and we're not quite halfway through, but to speak to so many legends of the whiskey industry from Australia and overseas as part of Forum, it's been such a pleasure for me. But what I love about this is just the fun, and it's a pretty shit house time, and particularly having so many people from Victoria, and there's so many bartenders and very good friends of ours that are doing it very, very tough down in Melbourne and wider from that as well. So it's a serious time, but just getting people on a stream and having a chat is putting a smile on everyone's face. And that's just what I love about whiskey. So for you guys, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for
giving us something to do in Victoria, Scotty.
Thanks.
I suppose too, Scotty, a special shout out to yourself, mate. You run a lot of these things, and how many Zoom sessions do you reckon you've done in the last 6 months?
69.
So I've got to stop now.
But no, thanks for hosting it, mate, and you do a great job, and appreciate your keen interest in the Aussie whiskey industry.
Yeah, well done.
Thanks, Ed.
If I need to sit in front of a computer and talk about whiskey, I reckon I can do that. That's not too bad.
See that comment? That actually is our so Nat works with us, and her birthday is 6969. Real.
6969.
Oh, it is too. That's a ripper.
and Nat, I'm so sorry, but out of all the parcels that got lost, it's still in the ether somewhere. So another one. So you'd actually get a parcel tonight. It's coming, I promise you. Maybe I might.
She better get 2 of the Shaggers Reserve then. I think.
Well, yeah, yes. I think I might need to chuck in a full bottle of the Shaggers.
But there's only one bottle of 6. So Nat bought a bottle of 69 for her dad, and then smashed it. So she had to buy another one. I think that was one of the last bottles we had. So.
Yeah, so I think Nat as an apology, you'll get a bottle of Shaggers Reserve when it arrives. But I mean, one thing I forgot to ask you just before I let you go, Fred, Sully's, what does the rest of 2020 and 2021 look like? We've had a few bottles here now. It's been like, when can we expect some more?
Well, yeah, we've had a pretty mental year. Most of our releases have been selling out in under 20 minutes when we put them up online. So that's why we do have to sort of like fight for allocations for awesome events like this, which obviously we want to do because it's so nice to be able to share a couple of nips with you guys. So I mean, it's funny because, you know, as the whiskey that we've all just tried from Sullivan's is a good indication of what we're bottling now are the experiments and the whiskies that were being laid down by Pat and his crew between 10 and 15 years ago. So we're obviously, you know, trying our best to kind of, you know, make as much whiskey as we can, given the demand that's out there and all that kind of stuff. But what we're bottling is just what we've got, and we taste the casks, and if they're not ready, we don't bottle them. So it's really the tasting panels that happen sort of every week, the samples that we pull every week. It's always a new story. So we can't really tell you what's coming down the track because, you know, the tasting panel will let us know what they think is ready to bottle and what's not.
That's a fantastic way to finish up, I think. And every after every panel, the next morning, I sort of put some talking points in and pull some quotes out, and you've just given me my quote for tonight. So thank you for that, Fred. That was very easy. I'm going to we'll just say some farewells in the Zoom. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone on the website, the various locations, and to Facebook. Thank you for joining us tonight from wherever you came from. We will see you all soon. Probably we'll be back tomorrow night with the Scotch Malt Whisky Society to do a blind tasting. I don't know what the whiskies are, so I'm going to make a fool of myself there as usual. So that's going to be good. Thank you to Jacob and Daniel on the Facebook there, but to everyone, and we will see you all soon.
Thanks, Scotty. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Scotty.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Legend.
Good night.
Good night, guys.